You're watching BreakThru News.
I'm Charlotte Hohenstein, and you're watching BreakThru News on BTR Today. On today's show, we're talking about whether the American dream is realistic in 2014. Joining us to discuss this is Luke Holden, the young entrepreneur behind the popular Luke's Lobster food shacks and food trucks, classically trained violinist turned lawyer Nathan Symington, and Aaron Smith, senior strategic advisor and co-founder at Young Invincibles. So Young Invincibles organization came out with a really interesting study in 2011 that showed that amongst millennials and at least 18 to 34-year-olds, there was a very, very strong entrepreneurial spirit, but certainly most people felt like they were being held back by the economy. But what certainly came through is that people in my generation, Generation Y, want to start a business and strike out on their own, more so than just climb up some corporate ladder or institution. So we have Luke, who's a very interesting example because he came to New York to do investment banking and worked in an investment bank for 3 years, and then broke away to start a food shack lobster truck business, which is now doing extremely well. Congratulations, Luke. You have expanded to 4 cities and have 9 restaurants, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
Oh, 4 states. We've got 11 currently, a couple in development.
Well, even better. That's amazing. So is this something that has always been a dream of yours, or was this an impromptu decision that you came to whilst working as an investment banker?
Sure. So being in the restaurant business was never a lifetime goal of mine. I grew up in a small town on the coast of Maine, was a fisherman, son of a fisherman. Lobstering in Maine was something that I was very passionate about, but I guess I started that probably sometime in middle school, carried it through high school into freshman year of college. I was studying at Georgetown University at the time, and my folks basically said that they were going to stop subsidizing my college experience if I didn't go do something outside of the nest, so to speak. So I had started to develop an interest in finance at school. Got into some internships at UBS over the summers of sophomore, junior year, and basically a lot of my friends were heading into that investment banking world, and it seemed like a good fit at the time because it gave me the opportunity to go move to New York, experience New York, get smart on somebody else's dollar, make some money, work hard. But it was never necessarily what I ultimately wanted to do, but I didn't really know the answer to that. What I did determine, though, throughout that experience was that I wanted to be more personally invested in the success and certainly even the problems of running a business. And while in New York, I saw the opportunity to open a fast casual lobster shack that was importing that or really exporting the Maine experience into the urban environment like New York.
Did it feel like a huge risk at the time to leave investment banking?
It did. So I mean, like my mother cried. She kind of looked at me and said, "Why would you do this? You know, I've seen your father go up and down in the seafood business for the last 30 years. You've got a great paying job. You've got health insurance. You can cover your rent." But she kind of knew that wasn't ever the right fit for me long term. I mean, I went from a relatively healthy salary and a nice bonus down to a $30,000 salary when I finally joined the restaurant group. So it was definitely a significant risk. But the other thing that was interesting too is this was back in 2009 when we opened the first location. The second one, when we opened in 2010, that's when I actually left the investment bank to join the restaurant group full time. But there was a lot of opportunity back then. The economy was in a recession. There was a lot of folks that wanted to be part of something that had a successful platform to grow. The real estate environment was very much pro-tenant, so you had the ability to kind of get out in front of these big, intimidating New York City landlords and say, "Hey, I'm a new, fun concept, and we need to make a deal that isn't going to sink me." And it was almost in that recessionary period, though, there was also opportunity to get going versus now. Things have definitely tightened up a little bit in that arena.
Mm. Aaron, Young Invincibles is an organization, right, that's devoted to, it's a nonpartisan nonprofit that's devoted to helping young adults really maximize their opportunities and their potential. What I find interesting is that on your website you differentiate between jobs and the economy and entrepreneurship. Why is that? And related to this, and the reason why I'm asking this is, do you see entrepreneurship, which so many young people seem to be really excited about, even if they're not going for it, do you see that, given all the risks involved, as a viable professional alternative to a more conventional career path?
Yeah, so I think that, as our polls showed and we've seen over and over again, entrepreneurship is broadly popular with young adults, really across the economic spectrum. I mean, it's one thing to keep in mind is only about a third of young adults our generation will graduate with a 4-year college degree. And really there's a huge diversity of backgrounds and experiences, and so we talk to young people who want to start a food truck, who want to start a construction company, to young people who want to start the next Facebook. It's very different backgrounds and experiences, different amounts of, I would say, capabilities, whether it's access to credit, whether it's startup funds, that can vary quite a bit. In my ideal world, entrepreneurship is a major part of the labor market for young adults. I don't think we're there yet for the vast majority of young people. I think it's, from a policy perspective, something that we should be aiming toward, and that's why we separate those on the website, because people still view those things separately. But I think that where the direction the economy is headed, in terms of more part-time work, more contracted work, more freelance work, is definitely going more toward entrepreneurship. Whether that's I'm doing something on Etsy to sort of supplement my income on the side, or like Luke, I just make that jump and try to start something from scratch. But definitely that's the direction we're headed.
Well, that's exciting. Nathan, you started out as a violinist and a musician and actually got several degrees to this end. Was that for you following your passion and your dream at the time?
Well, it's interesting. We've heard already that entrepreneurship is an alternative to coming up along a more conventional path. And although people don't usually think of becoming a corporate lawyer as an example of an alternative path, it actually was for me. In music, you start out doing music because you're interested in it, but sooner or later you have to face the reality of making a living at it, and quite often the things that make you a good musician, or that make you a music lover, are not necessarily the same things that would make you have a good career in music. Every job has its ups and downs, and like a lot of people, I wound up deciding that one way to ensure stability was to become qualified for an academic position. This is a usual move among 20th century musicians. In the 19th century, there weren't a lot of academic positions, and there wasn't really this idea. People looked for a patron instead, or just tried to be a big popular success. But these days, if you want to be a composer, it's almost taken for granted that you are going to get a doctoral degree and work at a university. If you want to do a great many things in music, that's kind of how it goes. But I think, like a lot of people of my generation, I found that path was not nearly as secure now as it might have been 20 or 30 or 50 years in the past. The average time to dissertation in my program, for instance, was in the range of like 8 to 12 years. So a lot of people were finding themselves coming out of school at like 40, 42, finding a job that didn't pay very well, or finding only part-time work. And I was thinking, well, if I'm going to buck these kinds of odds in order to spend a lot of my time doing academic administration and going to conferences and publishing things that I might not be particularly excited about publishing, well, why don't I just look at something else entirely? So I found myself in law, and actually, I actually enjoy working as a lawyer a great deal more than I enjoyed working as an academic in the field of music.
Aaron, one thing that came through in the survey that we've already mentioned is this sense of lack of resources, be it just straight up funding to start your own business, or knowledge required, education, training to run a business. Do you agree that that is a really, really crucial problem for people to overcome, or do you think that there is an element of you need to be willing to actually just learn as you go and start out, with perhaps very little and just pick it up as you go along?
Yeah, I mean it's a mixed bag. I mean, you definitely see examples of very successful entrepreneurs who did not have particular training on any of the aspects. They didn't have very much money, and they sort of worked their way up. But I would say that if you look particularly at the high-flying kind of entrepreneurs that everyone focuses on, many of them do come from backgrounds that maybe are a little more upper income, can allow, many of them get investment from their family and friend networks. You take the same kid, equally talented in Detroit, he just might not have that network to build off of. And so I think that was one of the findings of the poll, is that when you get outside, particularly you get outside of New York, the Bay Area, some of the hotbeds of entrepreneurship, people feel a little more disconnected. You certainly can't get, as a young person, it's very hard to get a loan from a bank, for example, to start your business. People do tend to cobble together money. Now, a lot of people succeed despite the barriers, but I also tend to believe that we can do some things to reduce those barriers. And I think education is key. Teaching kids in high school and in college, about how entrepreneurship works, and some of these things you got to learn on your own. But there are probably some things related to finance, for example, that could be really helpful.
Let's return to that idea of how to prepare yourself to strike out on your own. Right after this break, we're going to pause for a brief excerpt from this week's episode of Serious Business featuring Karl Marx. We're back with our discussion on following the dream with Aaron, Luke, and Nathan. So we were earlier talking about the value of education in preparing you for reinventing yourself, even if it doesn't seem directly related. Luke, did you find with your lobster business that your background in investment banking was helpful to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was helpful from many standpoints. I would say that the first was I learned how to work hard within a team environment. We were a very lean organization, and it was often taking a very, very big, complicated problem and chopping it up into small pieces and working as individuals and then reporting back as a group. And small business is very much in that vein. Limited resources is sort of like the definition of how you can do with limited resources, I think, is really the definition of, or defining aspect of how a small business operates.
Nathan, violin to law seems like quite an extreme leap, but what skills, if any, did you take with you from that background in music into your legal profession? Or was it a complete new slate for you?
Well, there was certainly a lot that I had to learn making the transition. I think that's probably true of most people who go into the practice of law. There's not really anything else that's like it. But that said, in music, I don't know. In music, part of what you have to learn is you have to learn how you work best yourself. You talk to 10 different top players, and they'll have 10 different approaches. The common denominator is just that each one has done a lot of deep introspection and self-study to learn how they perform best. And law is like that as well. Every person has a different working style, and really there's no template for how to become a successful lawyer. rather you have to become oriented on the results and tailor your process, I guess, iteratively to approach the results that you want to get.
Aaron, just going back to this idea of the value of education and specifically college education, given that it's tripled in cost since 1980, especially now with such an unstable job market, you see a lot of people, I think the number's 44%, underemployed, where they're in jobs that don't really relate to what their training is and their degree is. Do you think, and this might sound really harsh, but do you think that a college degree is overrated and that time could be spent, say, starting your own business? Or do you think that it's absolutely still essential? If you can strive for one, it just is going to come with more caveats than it did before.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at the statistics, college degree is absolutely still worth it in terms of, a young adult with a 4-year college degree has about under 5% unemployment versus if you look at a young adult, let's say with just a high school degree, they might have 15 or 16% unemployment. The wages are higher. I mean, it still pays off, but I do think that there are areas around the margins where young people take on a ton of student loan debt and don't really get a huge return out of it. And so I think young people need to be smarter consumers of higher ed and hold colleges more accountable. I also think the interesting thing that's happening, and Luke and Ethan's stories point to this, is there's so much churn in the labor market, especially for young adults, where I think I've seen a stat that you might have 11 different jobs by the time you're 40. And so the idea of an education, a college education, or any kind of post-secondary training you for a very specific industry, I think is rapidly becoming sort of antiquated. If I'm going to do so many different things, if I'm going to hop around trying to find the right fit, both personally and financially, then what I need are skills that are going to, like Luke was talking about, the ability to work in a team, the ability to think strategically, and yeah, there's a baseline of skills that everyone should have, but a lot of these kind of skills are really about analytical ability and understanding how the new economy works. So those are the kinds of things that I think colleges can actually be much better at teaching.
Well, that is all the time we have for now. Thank you very much, Luke, Aaron, and Nathan, for joining me today. To continue the conversation, share your thoughts with us on Twitter at BreakThru News. We'll be right back in a moment after this quick excerpt from a special episode of Live Studio featuring Milena Cadiz.
Where Teddy was dancing and sugars were eyes, I've got just from 9 to 5 in the morning. We pack about things and we drive past the radio tower and past 24 Hour and the hard living bar on the right, past the Texaco station and Motor Black Angus, where nobody stays for the night. When Teddy was talking about making a living, we all gotta do it, just take what you're given, and don't be too selfish and don't be too driven, but given a chance, just do right.
Thank you everyone for tuning in. I'm Charlotte Hohenstein, and this is BreakThru News, an independent news show for the free thinking web. We bring you a range of voices on the issues that today's generation is thinking about. Be sure to check out breakthrough.radio.com through the weekend for our continued Connection Week coverage as we explore how robot companions may become man's new best friend. That's it for what's breaking through the news today. Tell us what's breaking through your world on Twitter at BreakThru News. I'm Charlotte Hohenstein, and thank you for joining us.